The 2018 election fraud scandal in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District focused the country's political spotlight on Bladen County and on a man named McCrae Dallas. The convicted felon ran an operation to collect absentee ballots from voters in Bladen County and submit them to benefit Republican congressional candidate Mark Harris. Investigators later arrested Dallas and several others involved in his scheme. Mark Harris lost his election victory, and the saga of politics in Bladen County had another chapter. Reporters Nick Ochsner and Michael Graff spent months on the ground in Bladen County covering the story, and they've just released a new book, The Vote Collectors, the true story of the scamsters, politicians, and preachers behind the nation's greatest election fraud. Nick Ochsner, Michael Graff, welcome to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Wonderful to be here, John. Thank you.
You've both been reporters for many years. So, Nick, can you point me to the moment where you said to yourself, or you said in a conversation together, we've got to write a book about what we're covering here in Bladen County?
Yeah, I actually said it out loud to McCrae Dallas. It was the first time I said it. And I can't remember the exact moment, but it was sometime in December of 2018. And I was standing in McCrae Dallas's kitchen talking to McCrae and maybe one other person. And I don't remember what was going on, but I said, this story is so crazy. Someone's going to write a book about this, and maybe it ought to be me. And I'm a TV guy. What do I know about writing a book? But, you know, here we are. I've learned now. Now I know a lot.
Michael, what about you and your travels in Bladen County? When did it come across your mind that, yeah, this is something that's worthy of doing a book?
Well, I've always wanted to write a book about Eastern North Carolina, actually. I love Eastern North Carolina. My family lives there, not far from Wilmington. My mom lives in Charlotte. And I just think it's rich and fertile ground for stories. But after I worked on a story for Politico magazine about this scandal and spent about a week there and met Nick there in front of the courthouse in Elizabethtown one day. We were both reporting the story from different perspectives, of course. And then about 2 months later, we decided, you know, let's take our two sets of skills and put them together to try to put something good together for people.
Now, you're both, again, reporters, and as reporters, we compete against other stations. We compete even against other entities. That's part of the blood. You want the scoop. You want the exclusive. So did you all have to balance? Michael, I'll start with you. Did you have to balance wanting to get that exclusive or wanting to get that story with collaborating with another reporter on a larger story? How difficult was that?
I think that's a great question. I think because we came at it from different perspectives. I was doing a long sort of feature story, 10,000 foot view type of work. And Nick was there digging up stuff every single day. So we were kind of after different things. I was trying to put it in perspective in terms of what does this mean in terms of this fraud scandal mean in terms of Bladen County and history, like in terms of the history of the area and things like that. And Nick was digging up all the stuff that I was actually using in some of my reporting, and then together we got it. So we were coming at it from different perspectives. So Nick and I were never really competing on this.
Dick?
The fact of the matter is, John, that McCrae Dallas has only talked to one person. Well, now two people because I introduced him to Mike. But, you know, for better or for worse, McCrae Dallas hasn't talked to anyone else about the 2018 election fraud scandal except for me. And I'm, you know, came to that because I'm from Hope Mills, North Carolina, not far down the road from Bladen County, and knew some people that got me in the door. And I think that, you know, when you tell people in Bladen County you're from Hope Mills, they're really shocked, and then they might be willing to talk to you a little bit. So, right. And so, you know, I worked really hard against lots of folks down there reporting the story in the initial days and weeks. But when we talk about telling a book-sized story, right, and when you've got a character like McCrae, once you have that, you've got the story.
What about the bosses, Nick? Did you have to get leeway? Did you have to get clearance? Let's full disclosure here. You and I both work for TV stations owned by Gray Media. But what about the bosses? Did you have to go in there and say, hey, look, I'm going to continue to do this, but I'm looking at something bigger here? What did they say?
Yeah, that's pretty much how the conversation went. So I think I'm going to write a book about this. And my news director at the time, a guy named Dennis Milligan, said, okay, sounds fine. And he's since retired. And my current news director, Kim Saxon, and my assistant news director, Molly Kelleher, have been nothing but supportive. My general manager, the guy who runs the TV station, has been nothing but supportive. Actually, I think they see that as a value add to what I'm doing at the TV station as well. I think it is. And, there are things, as you know well, there are things that just don't fit on TV. Right. And stories that just don't fit on TV. And so it helps to have 95,000 words of story of real estate.
Yeah, it's even a little bit big for a website. Michael, you were a freelance journalist for a while at the time. So did you have a little more elbow room to be able to do something like this?
Yeah, I made several changes in my career over the course of this book, to be honest. I was a freelance writer at the time. And then I got hired to work for Charlotte Agenda here in Charlotte. And then Axios National bought Charlotte Agenda a year later. So I've worked essentially for three folks, myself, a small news outlet in Charlotte Agenda, and then a larger one in Axios Charlotte. So I'll say the Halloween parties and the Christmas parties have gotten bigger since it was just me.
Yeah, it's a little lonely when you go to a party by yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I noticed as I was reading the book, early on in the book, and I don't know who might want to take this, but early on in the book, I noticed McCrae Dowless was referred to as McCrae rather than Dowless. Now, maybe it's just the person in me who has read AP copy for a long time, but I noticed, and then sometimes you referred to him as Dallas and other times, but early on it was mostly McCrae. Was that intentional?
Yeah, I mean, look, McCrae is a central character in the book. And I think people have already heard, I mean, all over the globe, people have heard about the guy named McCrae Dowless, right, as it relates to his role in the 2018 election scandal. And they have a lot of thoughts and notions about who he is and what he is. But I think in order to understand the story fully, you actually also need to understand that McCrae is a human and a person. And there's a lot there before and actually has been since the 2018 election scandal. And so it actually helps you better understand what happened in 2018. It helps you better understand the history and the personalities and the clashes in Bladen County. But so I think absolutely, was it intentional on our part to try to develop McCrae as a character and as a person that the audience can get to know? Yes, because I think that is vitally important to understanding what happened in 2018.
You had extraordinary access to him, Nick, and you said, and you spelled it out in the book, a person, a friend, an acquaintance of a friend of a cousin or whatever it is, got you in the door. Hope Mills pried the door open a little bit more. But during this process, did it ever come in the back of your mind, even a little bit, that you were too close, that maybe it have impacted your reporting on the events that unfolded?
I don't actually ever think I got too close, just to say that up front, but it's certainly something that I'm always mindful of, whether it's McCrae Dowless or any other source, right? I mean, one way to be a good reporter is to go make sources and to know those sources really well. And that's how sources, that's how sources tell you things,
right?
Right? And that's how you get good stories,
right?
100%. And at the same time, there is a line, right? And I mean, I still talk to McCrae. I talked to him this morning, as a matter of fact. He called me. And obviously, when you've known someone now for 3 years, almost 3 years, he knows about my family and my life, and I know about his family and his life a little bit. That's just, again, making that connection. But at the end of the day, let's not be confused. McCrae Dowless is a source. And he knows. Mike and I sat down with him on Michael's first reporting trip down to Bladen County to meet with McCrae. And I said to McCrae, you're not going to like everything in this book. He understands that I wrote a book about him, and that means the warts and everything, right? But also at the same time, that's why it's helpful to have a reporting partner in Michael who can be here and help serve as a check to make sure, because as a journalist, you want as many to be one as transparent in your work as you possibly can be, and you want as many checks on yourself and to be open to scrutiny and criticism. And so it was helpful to have, a partner to be the scrutiny and criticism right away.
Michael, were there those checks and balances? Were there those conversations during this whole process?
Yeah, we had sort of a standing rule that I wouldn't talk to McRae without a tape recorder running, and that Nick, Nick could talk to him all he wanted, but we would make sure that McRae knew he was on the record when he was talking to me. Nick would call me after his conversations with McRae, and I would tell him, wow, that sounds interesting, or that sounds fishy, or something like that. And I was like, send me that in an email really quickly so we can get it down, and then we can come back and fact check what McRae said. So yeah, I mean, it was key to the book, I think, to keep that distance and have me there to sort of, I think it helps in the book because we spell it out very clearly in the book how we reported it. And I thought that was also very important to us. We were very transparent about exactly how many hours of interviews we had with him, things like that, because in a story that is essentially about, what is true and what isn't, honesty and integrity and things like that, we wanted to be as open and honest as we could possibly be.
Yeah, and that's one thing I did find as I was reading through the book is you guys did document. You guys, even several points, it felt to me as if you kind of backed away from this story that you're telling to say, okay, come over here. Here's a little thing we want to tell you. We want to tell you about this interview and set it up. And then, okay, now back to our story. So I think one of the things that I found, knowing as much as I know about it, but learning so much more, is that you guys were transparent in being able to say, now, he said this, we didn't necessarily believe it, but he said it, and then later on you come back and reference to it.
Yeah, and we actually, we even had a third party check most of it because we sent all of our tape to a transcriptionist. And so she did all of that work, and she recorded every single and like things like that to sort of keep it one more, even just give us one more layer of protection, I feel like.
Nick, the first time I ever heard of McRae Dallas was in 2012, a graphic on my newscast on election night when he won a seat on the Bladen County Soil and Water Conservation District as a supervisor. He appeared again in 2016, but you went back further than that to really develop him as a character and, tell me if I'm wrong here, really introduce the reason he got into politics to begin with, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, that is a fascinating thing about McRae Dallas. And I learned this again in a different night, sitting in his kitchen late one night as he chain smoked cigarettes and drank a Pepsi, as he started telling me about how he got into politics. And really, he got into politics to get even with the district attorney who sent him to prison back in the 80s. McRae Dallas is a convicted felon. He was convicted for insurance fraud because him and his then, I think, fiance, she was at the time, got an insurance policy out on a dead man and cashed the insurance policy and got a big payday. And he felt that he was prosecuted more aggressively than the fiance, who he says put him up to doing all that. And he felt that that was unfair. And so he got out of prison and he said, well, I know what I can do to get back at the district attorney. I can unseat him from his office. And that's how he got into politics. And he worked with the Bladen County Improvement Association, who, in 2018 was his arch rival and came to be his arch rival. But he learned a lot from the Improvement Association in the 90s, mostly in early 2000s. And so there's, again, understanding the person of who McRae Dallas is important to understanding the story of what happened in 2018 and things like this, and the origin story of how he became this political dude, I think is really important to understanding it.
And then, irony of all ironies, the fiance comes back later at the end and a relative comes back, and that's how the story of Bladen County politics adds another chapter to its saga. investigators ultimately used a Facebook post to connect some of the dots to the parties here. But Michael, in your estimation, how close did McCrae Dallas come to pulling this all off without an issue?
I guess it depends on what you think he was, how criminal he was being. I guess pulling it off. I want to start with that because we're still trying to find, still wondering whether his day in court will show that he's going to jail. So I guess we don't know yet. But I think that the larger story is that it has been going on in Bladen County for years, and so folks have been pulling it off for years. And so I think the real strange thing is that it got stopped this time. That's the crazy thing. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, John, because I think I hadn't thought about it that way yet, because my thought was they always pull it off. Everybody pulls it off all the time there. So the crazy thing was that it got stopped this time. So.
And you guys document that with sheriff's races. You guys document it with county commissioner races, which again, working down here since 1992, we've talked about this, but you guys really, this is the first deep dive into some of that that I've seen, but it took months and years of cultivating and research for it in order to get all of that information. And Nick, as you were going through this, I can imagine you pulling the onion layer back and going, oh, wow, there's more under here. Michael, let's go here. Is that how it felt?
No, to be quite frank, I didn't want to cover the 9th Congressional District story when it first came out. I didn't think it was going to be a story that went anywhere growing up in that part of the world. This is just, I mean, you've heard it. If you've worked, you've worked in Wilmington for how long in southeastern North Carolina, there are always the speculation and always these rumors, right? And of fraud. And we saw in 2016 where the Pat McCrory campaign used McCrae Dallas to file a complaint in a long shot effort to question the results of the 2016 gubernatorial race that he had lost. And that resulted in nothing, right? Well, it actually resulted in 300 pages of investigative file that got ignored, but functionally nothing publicly.
But that's another podcast episode.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But my point being, we've heard this for a long time. And the first words I said in person to McCrae Dallas when I got to his driveway the first time I met him was, I don't know what you have or haven't done, but I know you're not the only person who's done it. And I still believe that. And I think what we talk about in the book proves that out to be true. And so, frankly, yes, it was a lot of work to assemble all of what we found, but I'll also say I knew there was more stuff there than what was being reported at the time, and it was really just a matter of going to dig for it and find it. But I can't say I was surprised.
And it sure as heck isn't a day turn either.
No.
It's not something you could do in a VO bite at 5 and a package at 6.
That's exactly right.
You guys have a couple of statements in this book, and the best way I can describe them as I was writing down some notes and questions here is that these comments are staggering in concept, but ho-hum in Bladen County politics. The ballot harvest season runs along the same timeline as beans in eastern North Carolina. That's one that just floored me. And elections in Bladen County are not won at the voting booth, but at the mailbox. And so McCrae kept at it. Pull people in from anywhere else in the United States and say those two lines to them and their head goes boom. But when you think Bladen County, it's like, yeah, next week, right?
What we wanted, yeah, I think that's great. It makes me happy that connected with you down there in southeastern North Carolina, because what we want is these lines to be recognizable to the people who live there and to be interesting to the people who don't. So we want folks to dive into it if they don't know anything about Bladen County, and we want people who live in Bladen County to say, "Yep, that's us." Like that's what we want people to see.
Well, the fact that ballot harvest season runs along the same timeline as beans, I read that, and I'm a fan of good writing. I've interviewed a lot of authors this year, and I will text them, I will tweet at them and say, where did you come up with this line? But that to me, there's a lot of great lines in the book, but that to me, I underlined, I highlighted. I was like, I got to ask these guys about that. Because again, it's mind-blowing to me.
And it's to a T, bean season. I mean, it is. You're talking about when you go and mail it out, and when you go and pick it up. It's just amazing.
And John, it's important you talk about and you touch on, really what you're touching on is, Michael wrote that line. It's one of the best lines in the book, and Michael's a writing genius, right? That's why I wrote a book with him, because I knew he'd make it really, really good.
Yeah, and you picked a good one too.
But it's important for people to have a sense of the place where this happened. It's important for people, the best we could, to make the place of Bladen County almost a character in this book. Because if you're from Bladen County, you know it, and you can read it through that lens. You're from southeastern North Carolina, and you've had a Melvin's hamburger, you can kind of understand what we're talking about. But even if you just live in Charlotte, but certainly if you live in DC or anywhere else in this country, it's important. It was important to me and Mike, for the people reading this, to understand how unique and how special of a place Bladen County is, because it is, but it's also wholly different than a lot of other parts of this country, and at the same time wholly the same as a lot of other parts of this country. But
you spelled it out in early on, I think at page 14, you spelled it out, and see, it stuck with me. And you're taking people along 74 from Charlotte to, ultimately it ends in Wilmington, but into the Bladen and the Columbus counties. And you talk about the red clay turning to the sand. And you talk about the rotting public housing, which I can see in my mind on the right. And then you cross the bridge of 95, and I can see the prison on the left. And you did a great job in painting the picture there. And I've been on that road. I've made trips to Charlotte going up and down that road. So maybe I've become numb to it. But setting the scene the way you did, I think you did make Bladen County a character. And you succeeded, at least in my mind, as I read the book.
That means so much to say, to hear you say, because it was really, really important. Also, not only to making it the place, but to understand that drive along 74 is one congressional district. Right. And for Mark Harris that day, when he went to have a meeting in a furniture store with a guy who he was told could win him a seat in Congress, to understand the scenery that he's passing and the change in scenery from his red brick house in South Charlotte. You drive down 74, just as you described, and you get to Bladen County. It is different. It is different, and it is a different world. So I'm glad to hear you say. And
we do. I don't want to get too much off on a tangent here, but when we do stories about political redistricting, and you look at districts that have the metro of Charlotte all the way down to rural Robeson and Bladen and Columbus counties, and you got to sit in the back of the room in Raleigh and go, excuse me, can somebody explain to me how you can have these two people in the same political district, an hour and a half, 2.5, 3.5 hours apart? And so there are byproducts of all this all along the way. And again, covering politics as the three of us have, we're preaching to the choir here, but it's the dichotomy of something like that just stands out.
Yeah.
It's sort of, and you're talking about one of the main themes of the book, I think. The distance between Charlotte and Bladen County, both literally and figuratively, as a symbol for this book. I mean, you're talking about the distance between there. It's a different place. The landscape is totally different. But what we need to do as a country to honestly heal some of the stuff that we've done is to close that gap somehow. How we can't keep letting Charlotte and Raleigh and places like that get richer and richer and richer, while places like Bladen County get poorer and poorer and poorer, because that gap is only going to continue to grow and to rot us.
Nick, you brought up Mark Harris a second ago, and one of the quotes in the book, "It's a failure of leadership on my part. I should have investigated McCrae more." In your mind, had he investigated McCrae more, at least in Bladen County anyway, would things have changed, or would people have told him, yeah, you need to go with McCrae anyway, had he looked even deeper?
That's a good question. It's actually a really good question. I'd like to hear him answer that because I don't know what the answer would be.
But I mean, you understand my question. If he would have investigated McRae in Bladen County, people would have said, he'll get the job done. He'll do this. So it might have been the same anyway.
Well, and that's my point. That's why I would really like to hear, so he did. I think it's important first to understand that is the closest he comes to taking responsibility for what happened in 2018. That quote, I think, is probably the closest he'll come to. And, he was warned by his son, John Harris, who wrote in emails prophetically exactly what he thought McRae might be doing and exactly what would happen if he hired McRae Dallas. And then that all came true, right, years later. But if you're Mark Harris, you would say, look, I went to Bladen County. I sat with all the politicos in Bladen County. I mean, Marion Warren, a judge and at the time the director of the administrative office of the courts, said, McRae Dallas is your man. And Pat Melvin, the biggest Republican money guy in Bladen County, said McRae is your man. And the sheriff, Jim McVicker, said McRae is your guy. And so I think somewhat understandably, Mark Harris said these people vouched for him, so I think he's good. But if you think about another deeper level, you had his son saying, Dad, here's this evidence, and this looks real, real bad. You should think again. And if you read the email exchange back and forth between father and son, it is clear he wanted to rest only on the representations of the people he talked with in Bladen County. And he didn't want to think deeper about what his son was saying. He didn't want to look deeper in the numbers because he thought, and turned out to be pretty accurately, that McRae Dallas, if he hired McRae, he would win a seat in Congress. And that is what happened at great cost.
I'll tell you, as I read the book, and I remember thinking back now and watching that State Board of Elections hearing, and the one image that still stands out to me is Mark Harris weeping in the audience when his son was testifying. And to me, that still stands out in my mind. And I don't think I'll ever forget that. Just being the human element to all that I don't think I'll ever forget it.
No, and I think that's what a lot of people still latch on to. I mean, we've been talking to folks a lot about this book lately, and that's come up a lot, just because, we're all born to somebody, and we all have to, we all have a parent and somebody, and you have your differences with them. Would you ever take the stand and say what John Harris said? And I think that a lot of people latched on to his integrity. And I think that says as much about him as it does our hopes for people being honest in some ways. Our expectations that people will be honest in settings like that is very low. And John came in and just exceeded them in every way.
Yeah, it's a memory that, you have those images from different things that will stay with you, and that's the one that will stay with me. Nick, this may be an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think the major players here, the McRae Dallases, the Lisa Britts, the Ray Britts, the Horace Munns, the Mark Harrises, do you think that they think they did anything wrong?
No. I know McRae doesn't think he did anything wrong. He told me that today when he said he was not going to take a plea deal to the state charges. They don't. No, and same with the Horace Munns. And we know that Mark Harris doesn't think he did anything wrong because he didn't. He still says he didn't know what McRae was doing. And despite what we just said about him, if he wanted to have looked, could have found some more evidence about it. But it's also important to understand, illegally or not, this is how people voted in Bladen County for a long time. Right. I mean, just objectively, how people voted in Bladen County for a long time. And that also raises the question then, why did it only become illegal in 2018 when there was a congressional race that was decided by less than 1,000 votes? People knew about this. The State Board of Elections knew about this. They did all they could to try to tell local prosecutors and federal prosecutors what was happening. There was even more evidence that the State Board of Elections didn't collect prior to 2018 that existed out in the world. And so in Bladen County, this is just how you voted. This is just what happened. And if that's just how it is, in your mind, you don't think that's wrong at all.
Michael, it seemed like the takeaway here is what happened in the 9th District race in 2018 was a systemic failure rather than isolated wickedness. Playing off what Nick just said, the entire system local and state, failed in this instance. Is that what your takeaway was? That's what I seem to get from the book.
Oh, 100%. I mean, 2018 absolutely did not have to happen the way it did. The State Board of Elections put together a report about 2016 saying that you guys need to look into this, telling the U.S. Attorney, look into this. And the U.S. Attorney did not look into it. I mean, that's very clear. But one of the, thinking about what Nick said, one of the key, and I think every reporter who went to Bladen County in December of 2018 probably heard the same thing. If you talk to anybody in that county, is, what are you doing here now? Where you been? Like, yeah, of course something's crooked. Like, and they just didn't think anything was wrong. I stopped people in the grocery store in Elizabethtown, and they would just be like, "Yeah, everything's crooked. The sheriff's office is crooked. Everything's crooked. Like, what are you asking us about this now for?" And I think that was, and in fact, Donnie Douglas, the editor of the Robertsonian, did a radio show with me a couple of years ago, and he said, "We've been hollering about this for years, and just hoping people would pay attention." And finally, people paid attention.
Nick, I took some heat on social media for not following up with President Trump in the interview you guys referenced at the airport. I've told the story that we were 15 feet from Air Force One. The heat indexes was 120. I'd been out there for 4 hours, could barely hear what he said. People didn't care. They said, "Why didn't you follow up?" You took some heat on social media during this whole process as well. What was that like for you? Because I sure as heck know what it was like for me in the 24 or 48 hours that people called me an idiot and ripped me all over social media for not doing what they thought my job was.
Yeah, it's nice to get that question from someone who's also had a bad day on the internet.
No, I had, that day people called me, they sent one idiot to talk to another idiot and so on and I mean, like, yeah. Okay, yeah, maybe I didn't follow up, but here's the setting. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
And look, those people missed the important part, that you got what he said on camera, right? Yeah. That's your job. Yeah. And in some respects, our job is to get these people saying these things. The biggest heat I took for my reporting in Bladen County was with the interview I did with Lisa Britt, which she testified to under oath at the State Board of Elections hearing. Incorrectly, that she said she'd basically been coerced into doing this interview with me and saying what she said in this interview, basically under duress. And it all was wrong. I mean, it was just not true. And at the time, I couldn't talk about it because it involved McCrae Dallas, who at the time was a confidential source. I hadn't gotten him to agree to speak to me on the record yet. And we as journalists have agreements, and we can't break those agreements. And not exaggerating, the heat that I took from that and being unable to explain that, and that bad day I was having on the internet, Mike saw, invited me over to his brother's brand new, just closed on unfurnished house for a beer one Saturday night.
I bet that was the best tasting beer you had in a long time.
Yes, and he correctly assumed that I could use a beer that night, and I could, and we had a couple beers and decided to write this book together. And so, as well as I do that people on the internet are generally throwing mud at you because they didn't stop to think about the entirety of the circumstance. It happens. Right. If people want to buy the book, they're welcome to throw more mud if they'd like. Just buy a copy of the book.
yeah. As long as you buy the book, yeah. But I mean, it to me, when I heard about it, and look, we've been in the business a long time. I've been following your stuff over there in Charlotte. We worked together at the General Assembly many days and crossed each other's paths. So I know what it's like to take that heat, but to take it specifically in an instance related to this is another thing that we kind of have in common, along with working with the same company and doing the same thing for a living.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And look, it's part of the job. Yeah. When you're taking heat, at least people are paying attention. That's what I've told myself.
Nick, when did you want to become a journalist? When did Nick want to become a reporter?
I didn't. I applied for a job in March of my senior year of college as a reporter, kind of just to see if I was going to like it or not. Didn't think I was going to. And here I am 10 years later. So
where was that?
Odd accident.
Where was that?
My first job is at KMAC 28 News in Lubbock, Texas. And I told my boss who hired me, my news director there, I said, I'm only doing this because I want to be an investigator. And he's like, yeah, right. Okay, whatever. And then about a week into the job, he threw a newspaper article on my desk and said, here, see if you can replicate this here. And I did, and we got 7 people fired from the city. So the rest, as they say, is history.
Michael, what about you? When did reporting cross your path, and how did you get into the business?
I grew up in rural Southern Maryland to a first grade teacher and a fisherman. And so we got to go to 1 or 2 Orioles games a year on our budget. And I wanted to be a sports reporter because I learned that they went to games for free. So that was what it started for me. I just wanted to go to Orioles games for free. So I was a sports reporter for a while. And then I moved over to news and feature writing when I was at the Fayetteville Observer. So I spent 4 years in Fayetteville at the paper there, and went over to news and features there, and just fell in love with it.
And that's great training ground there. That is fertile ground for great stories when you work in the Fayetteville Observer.
It is one of the best storytelling cities in the country. If you're interested in finding wild things happening, that's for sure.
What did you learn about book writing in this process, Michael? You've written for many years. You've reported. You've told smaller stories. But what did you learn about the process of writing a book that maybe surprised you the most?
It's long and it's enjoyable. I learned if you take a long weekend in the mountains with Nick, you can knock out 3 or 4 chapters. But no, it's hard, and I learned planning is probably the biggest thing. And digging up as much as you can before you even start to get going. It's a challenging process for sure.
Can you take me through how the process unfolded for actually writing? Did you both come at it with, here's what I think we should do? Did you both sit down behind the typewriter? How did that all work?
Yeah, no. So it's interesting. Michael and I have totally different and very complementary skills, very different. And so I kind of joke that I was, kind of a framing guy. I'd frame things out and rough it in, and Mike would come along and finish it and make it beautiful. We tackled different parts of the book, and I would write something, and I would then leave it for Mike to come and polish up and shine up. And he really handled and attacked all of the history section, tackled that on his own. And I tried to attack sections 1 and 3, and he would come in and make them better and prettier and ready for public consumption. But it was really a collaborative process the entire time.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to work with Nick, to be honest. I mean, he had dug up he'd basically tilled the soil before we even came, before I even came aboard. He had documents and interviews and things like that that really helped us just get going. We started well down the road to this book. And then what I was doing was mostly, if McCrae Dallas went to jail in 1993 on October 1st, I was like, whatever that date was, I was like, wait, he would have passed the Columbus County Fair. Let's ask him about that. Like, what is that like to know that all your friends are over here on this side of the road and you're going over here to the prison? And so I did a lot of that kind of detail work just to make things a scene more than just a series of pieces of information. So that's what I did mostly.
Well, what I found this to be was an education for me. Again, covering it from here and anchoring what our folks, Emily and everybody did out there in Bladen County, seeing the stuff that Nick was turning every night for our sister station out there, WBTV. So learning a lot of the background for me was a good read. But I also learned so much, and you guys weave this in the second part, and some of the things you brought in. Bladen County not having a fair anymore, and Irving Joyner having something to do with this. And then the 1898 insurrection in Wilmington and the riots being mentioned. And it's just like, things just passed through all this. And I don't want to say it's like a textbook because there's more to it than that, but I really felt when I flipped that last page that, wow, I got an education in Bladen County and also in the history, really, of southeastern North Carolina. I don't know if that's what you were going after, but that's what I took away from it. And I know you're going to get a million other people give you their opinions, but I at least wanted to share that with you guys because that's what I took away.
I mean, that means everything to us. I mean, like I said, that part of the world is very special to us. So to hear it from you, of all the people we've talked to about this book so far, is just, it's really meaningful to us. Because no, we don't want it to be a textbook, but we definitely didn't want it to be a political book, just a political book that ends up on the shelves next to every single, Donald Trump biography or something like that. We didn't want that at all. We wanted it to be a story about place that lasts a long time. I hope that people are buying this book in 5 years, not just the next 2 weeks. I hope it's really important to people to remember that it's a snapshot of a place over a period of time.
Well, and you really hit the nail on the head, John, that we tried to spell out for people that what happened in 2018 wasn't an isolated event. It didn't just spontaneously happen. It happened really because of the collision of a lot of things that had been building up for more than 100 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it is mind-blowing to me that you can draw a straight line from Reconstruction to what happened in 2018. And that's not an exaggeration. You can go right from there, and it passes through the Wilmington Massacre, and it passes through the Civil Rights era, and it goes up until 28, and the fact that we're able to do that in the book, to me, is the thing I am proudest of in the book. Because again, just like it's important to understand the character and the human of McCrae Dallas to understand what happened in 2018, it's equally important to understand the character and the history of Bladen County in southeastern North Carolina, and that helps you understand what happened in 2018 as well.
And what I think was cool, though, is that in the way you told the stories, you're telling a story about a young man with the last name Joyner, and then all of a sudden, a couple of pages later, you hear Irving, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, is this going to be? And the next thing you know, you've connected those dots, and then people who know Mr. Melvin and Melvin's Hamburgers, no. Oh, you connected those dots. And then the next thing you know, somebody who had something to do with the 1898 riot in Wilmington, there's a direct line there. That's what fascinated me. And I must give you both all the kudos in the world, because I've read a lot of books this year, and this one was as big an education for me as any of them, especially to the place that I call home here in southeastern North Carolina.
Could you send that to what you just said to every media outlet in the country to say the same thing?
I mean, there's not a better compliment. I mean, there's really not.
Well, I appreciate it.
Really
Nick Ochsner, Michael Graff. The book is The Vote Collectors, the true story of scamsters, politicians, and preachers behind the nation's greatest election fraud. Nick, from our sister station WBTV in Charlotte, always good to talk to you, and continued success to you, my friend.
Same to you. Thanks for having us. This has been really, really great, John. Thank you.
Michael, now working at Axios Charlotte. I get the emails every morning. I know what's going on in the big Queen City, but you have had a great career working politics and working news. Thank you for sharing some of your time, and thanks for being a part of this entire effort.
Gosh, thank you. This was an amazing interview, and just to be able to chat with you, I live in Charlotte, but you're on my mom's TV every day in Charlotte. So I'm just grateful for the conversation. Thank you very much.
A huge thank you to both Nick Ochsner and Michael Graff for sparing some time and joining us for this week's podcast interview. The Vote Collectors is available now on all of the major sites like Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you'd like to learn more about it, you can go to uncpress.org and search The Vote Collectors. Nick is the chief investigative reporter at our sister station WBTV in Charlotte. You can go to WBTV.com to find Nick. Michael is an editor at Axios Charlotte. His website is michaelngraff.com, and both are very active on social media. Now, before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please download and subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app you use to listen to your favorite shows. And if you would be so kind, please kindly leave us a rating or a review. We really do care what you think about our interviews, and the more feedback we get from friends like you, the higher we'll be listed on the apps, the better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of One-on-One.